She was already halfway to the door, mascara held by sheer willpower, hands gripping her coat like it was the only thing keeping her upright, when a 5-year-old girl with a gap-toothed smile stepped directly into her path and said, "You look really sad. Did somebody hurt your feelings?" Madison Cole stopped walking. The restaurant didn't go quiet. Nobody else even noticed. But in that moment, with Christmas music playing softly overhead and a child staring up at her with the kind of unguarded concern that adults spend decades learning to hide, Madison felt something crack open in her chest that she had spent 3 years packing shut. She had no idea that small crack was about to change everything. If you've ever been made to feel like you weren't enough, stay with me. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The reservation had been for 2. Table 12, corner booth. Good lighting, which she had specifically requested when she called ahead. Not out of vanity, but because she knew how restaurant lighting could work against a person, could turn a face into something unflattering and strange. And Madison had learned over years of first dates and polite rejections and men who smiled at her across a table and then never called back, that she needed every possible advantage she could get. She'd arrived at Hargrove's at 6:40. The date was scheduled for 7. By 7:15, she'd stopped checking her phone every 30 seconds and started checking it every 60. By 7:30, she ordered a glass of sparkling water and told the server, a young woman with tired eyes and a name tag that said Bree, that she was still waiting. Bree nodded in the way servers nod when they already know how the evening is going to end. By 7:50, Madison checked her phone one final time and found a text. "Hey, I'm really sorry. I'm not going to make it tonight. Honestly, after seeing your pictures again and doing a little more research, I think this would be too complicated. You seem like a lot, and I'm looking for something simple. No hard feelings." She read it twice, then a third time. Not because she didn't understand it the first time, but because some part of her brain kept trying to find a version of those words that didn't mean what they obviously meant. "You seem like a lot." She set the phone face down on the tablecloth. Around her, Hargrove's was doing what it always did on Christmas Eve, being aggressively warm and festive in that way that upscale restaurants leaned into during the holidays. Like if they draped enough pine garland and lit enough candles, they could sell the feeling of belonging to people who were paying for dinner. It was a good restaurant. She'd eaten here 3 times before, always for business, always with a clear agenda. She knew the menu. She knew the wine list. She'd negotiated a catering contract with the owner 18 months ago and gotten favorable terms. She was very good at her job. She was 30 years old and sitting alone at a table for 2 on Christmas Eve with a glass of sparkling water and a text message on her phone that said she was too complicated. Madison picked up her coat from the seat beside her. She did it slowly, deliberately, the way she did everything when she needed to not fall apart in public, with controlled, practiced movements and a face that gave away nothing. She had gotten very good at that face over the years. It was useful in boardrooms and investor meetings, and on the rare occasions when a man looked at her body and then at her face, and then made a decision she could see him making in real time. She was getting up. She was leaving. She was going to go home, pour herself a glass of wine that was actually good, and watch something stupid on television. And tomorrow was Christmas, and she had nowhere to be until noon when her college friend Priya was hosting brunch. She was completely fine. She stood, slid into her coat, and was picking up her purse when she looked across the restaurant. Just a reflexive sweep of the room, the kind of automatic awareness she'd developed from years of reading rooms. And her eyes landed on a table near the window. There was a family there. A man, maybe early 30s, in a dark green sweater that had seen better days. An older couple who had to be his parents. The woman reaching across to adjust the man's collar. The man sitting back with the particular ease of someone who had been watching his wife do that for 40 years. And a small girl, 5, maybe 6, in a red dress with a white collar, currently engaged in a very serious negotiation with what appeared to be a bread roll. They weren't a perfect tableau. The older man had knocked his water glass earlier. Madison had noticed because Bree had rushed over with a towel. The grandmother was talking too much, and the grandfather kept nodding in the patient way of a man who had learned to pick his battles. The little girl dropped the bread roll and leaned half out of her chair to retrieve it, and the man in the green sweater said something that made her sit back up, but not sternly. It was the voice of someone who had said the same thing many times and had accepted that it would need to be said many more. It was a completely ordinary family Christmas dinner. Madison watched them for 4 seconds before she made herself look away. She had things to do. She was leaving. She was 3 steps from the table, coat on, purse over her shoulder, face composed, when she heard a small voice say, "Excuse me." She stopped. Standing directly in her path was the little girl in the red dress. She was missing one of her front teeth. Her hair was in 2 braids that had started the evening neat and were now winning a slow war against their elastics. She had crumbs on her collar, and she was looking up at Madison with the specific quality of attention that only young children and certain animals can sustain. Total, unfiltered, and completely without agenda. "You look really sad," the girl said. "Did somebody hurt your feelings?" Madison stared at her. Behind the girl, across the restaurant, she could see the man in the green sweater already half out of his chair with the expression of a parent who has been ambushed by their own child in a public place. "I'm fine," Madison said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I'm just leaving." The little girl tilted her head. "My dad says when people say they're fine really fast, it means they're not fine." Sophie. The man had crossed the restaurant with the efficient walk of someone used to intercepting small catastrophes. He crouched down beside the girl, hand on her shoulder, and looked up at Madison. "I'm so sorry, He gestured vaguely. "She does this." "I was being nice," Sophie said with dignity. "You walked across the whole restaurant by yourself," he said. "You could see me the whole time." He looked at Madison with an expression that was equal parts embarrassment and exhausted humor. "I really am sorry. She saw you from across the room and decided—" "I decided she looked sad," Sophie said, turning to look at Madison again. "Are you leaving because of the man who didn't come?" The silence that followed was brief but complete. Madison felt the familiar contraction in her chest, the instinct to deflect, to smile, to say something smooth and move on. She looked at this child, this impossibly direct child, who was watching her with those serious dark eyes and waiting. "Sophie," the man's voice was quiet. "I heard you on the phone," Sophie told Madison, not unkindly, "when you were talking to Bree. You said you were still waiting, and then you stopped waiting, and you got your coat." She paused. "That makes people sad." Madison looked at the man. He was watching his daughter with an expression she couldn't entirely read, something between exasperation and a kind of helpless, wondering affection. "I'm Landon," he said. He straightened up and offered his hand. "Landon Pierce. I'm really sorry for the interruption." She shook his hand. "Madison Cole." "I'm Sophie," Sophie said, as if there had been any question. Landon Pierce was not having a perfect Christmas Eve. He had burned the pie he'd tried to make that morning. Not badly, just enough that the kitchen smelled wrong for 2 hours. He'd forgotten to charge Sophie's tablet overnight, and she'd noticed at 7 a.m. and reacted with the proportionate devastation of someone whose tablet was the only thing standing between them and the apocalypse. His green sweater had a small hole near the left elbow that he'd noticed only after he was already dressed, which meant he'd spent the drive to the restaurant holding his arm at an angle to hide it. His parents, Frank and Carol Pierce, were in good health and good spirits, and had been gently, consistently, relentlessly asking him about his personal life since approximately March. His mother had taken to leaving the question unspoken and instead simply looking at the empty chair beside him with an expression of pointed, loving concern. He loved his family. He loved this restaurant. He loved Christmas. He did not love the persistent hollow sensation that lived somewhere under his sternum most of the time now, the one he'd learned to work around the way you learn to walk carefully around a loose floorboard. You knew where it was. You avoided it. You got on with things. It had been 4 years since Claire died. That was not a thought he allowed himself to have at dinner. He filed it away with practiced efficiency and focused on making sure Sophie didn't eat so much bread that she refused her actual meal, which was an ongoing battle of wills. Then Sophie had stood up from the table. He'd seen her eyes fix on something across the restaurant, that particular quality of attention she got when she was about to make a decision, and he'd tracked it to a woman at a corner table who was putting on her coat with the careful deliberateness of someone trying very hard to look like everything was fine. He'd seen the moment Sophie made up her mind. He'd said her name. She'd already gone. He made it across the restaurant in time to hear his daughter ask the woman if someone had hurt her feelings. Up close, the woman was striking in a way that had nothing to do with how she was dressed or how she'd done her hair, though both were clearly considered. She had a face made for strong emotion, expressive, mobile, currently doing its absolute best to perform neutrality and not quite succeeding. She was tall. She carried herself like someone who had learned, through some effort, to take up space. And she was looking at Sophie with an expression that Landon recognized because he'd worn it himself once or twice. The expression of someone who has been seen more clearly than they're comfortable with and doesn't know what to do about it. "The empty chair is still there," Sophie said to Madison. "If you want to sit." "Sophie." "We have extra bread," Sophie added. "And Grandma Carol ordered too much food again. She always does." She looked over her shoulder toward the table, where Carol was watching the whole exchange with an alertness that Landon knew meant she was already filing information. "She says it's in case people are still hungry, but Daddy says it's because she can't help herself." "I said she likes to be prepared," Landon said. "You said she can't help herself," Sophie said, "when you were on the phone with Uncle Marcus." Landon closed his eyes briefly. "I appreciate the offer," Madison said. Her voice was careful, controlled, the voice of someone who spent a lot of time in rooms where they needed to control their voice. "But I don't want to impose on your families." "You're not imposing," Sophie said. "We invited you." "I invited her," Landon said. "You invited yourself into her personal—" "I was being friendly," Sophie said, with a patience that made her sound approximately 45 years old. Madison looked at Landon. He looked back at her. "You don't have to," he said. "Genuinely. She'll survive. She's already planning her next move." Sophie was, in fact, watching Madison with the focused patience of someone who had decided what was going to happen and was waiting for the universe to catch up. Madison looked at the door, then at the corner table where an older woman was watching with bright, interested eyes, and an older man had picked up his menu but was clearly not reading it. Then at Sophie. "Just for a little while," Madison said. "I don't want to—" "You're not," Landon said. He wasn't sure why he said it again. He said it again anyway. "You're really not." Carol Pierce had grown up in a house where the table always had room for one more. It was not something she'd ever had to decide deliberately. It was just how the household worked, how her mother had run it, how she'd run her own. Frank had never questioned it. Frank understood that some things weren't policies so much as they were character. When Landon appeared at the table with a woman in a camel coat and Sophie walking between them with the satisfied air of someone whose plan had worked exactly as intended, Carol processed approximately 7 pieces of information in the space of 2 seconds and reached a preliminary conclusion she kept carefully off her face. "Mom, Dad," Landon said, and she could hear the particular tonality in his voice that meant he was managing the situation and would appreciate her cooperation. "This is Madison. Sophie ambushed her. I invited her to join us for a little while." "Madison." Frank half stood, which was Frank's way. "Frank Pierce. Sit down, please." "Carol." She extended her hand. "Don't mind the chaos. It's a standing tradition." "I'm not chaos," Sophie said, climbing back into her chair. "I'm a helper." Madison sat. She had good posture, the kind you notice because it wasn't rigid but practiced, a decision made at some point and repeated until it became automatic. She set her purse on the floor with the precision of someone who kept track of their things. She looked around the table and produced a smile that was genuinely warm, but also, Carol noted, slightly delayed, like it had to travel from somewhere deeper than the surface. "I really appreciate this," Madison said. "You didn't have to." "Of course we didn't," Carol said pleasantly. "We wanted to. Now, are you hungry? We've ordered everything on the left side of the menu." "She ordered everything on the left side of the menu," Frank said. "I had the soup." "You also ate half my salmon." "I tasted your salmon." Landon rubbed his face with one hand in a way that Carol recognized as the expression of a man who was pretending to be more tired than he was, because pretending to be tired meant he didn't have to process what he was feeling. "Do you have family nearby?" Carol asked Madison. "My parents are in Phoenix," Madison said. "My brother's in Seattle. We're doing a video call tomorrow. Phoenix, Frank said. We had a layover in Phoenix once. Very hot. It is very hot, Madison agreed. You didn't grow up there? Columbus. I moved here for work about 6 years ago. Carol watched Landon not quite look at Madison from across the table. She watched him ask about work because he was the kind of man who defaulted to practical questions when he didn't know what else to say, and she watched Madison answer. The particular crispness that came into her voice when she talked about her company, the way her posture shifted slightly, the way the smile became less complicated. People were easier to read than they thought they were. What do you do? Landon asked. I run a supply chain consulting firm, Madison said. Coal Logistics. We work mostly with mid-size manufacturers. She paused. It sounds less exciting than it is. Does it? Supply chain is genuinely interesting once you're in it. A ghost of a real smile. It's essentially just solving very expensive puzzles under time pressure. Dad does houses, Sophie said helpfully. I'm in residential construction management, Landon said, which is also essentially solving expensive puzzles under time pressure. So you have that in common, Carol said, to no one in particular. Grandma, Landon said. What? I'm making conversation. Sophie was watching Madison with the steady focus of a child conducting research. Do you have a dog? She asked. Sophie, Landon said. I'm asking, Sophie said. I don't have a dog, Madison said. She seemed amused rather than put upon, which Landon noticed. I travel a lot. It wouldn't be fair to a dog. We don't have a dog either, Sophie said. Daddy's allergic. I'm sensitive to certain. Daddy sneezes a lot around dogs, Sophie told Madison confidentially. He says it's not an allergy because he doesn't want to be allergic. That's a reasonable position, Madison said. Frank laughed, a real one, the kind that surprised him on the way out. Carol watched Madison's face when Frank laughed, watched the small but genuine pleasure that moved across it, the way she relaxed a fraction of an inch. What kind of dog do you like? Sophie asked. Sophie, she just said, hypothetically, Sophie said, apparently having recently added hypothetically to her vocabulary and finding numerous applications for it. What kind would you get? Hypothetically? Madison considered this with more seriousness than the question probably required. Something medium-sized, she said. Calm. That doesn't need too much maintenance. A greyhound, maybe. Greyhounds are fast, Sophie said. They actually love to sleep, Madison said. They're couch dogs. Sophie processed this. Like Dad, she said. I'm not a couch dog, Landon said. You sleep on the couch. I rest on the couch. You were asleep, Sophie said. I checked. Your mouth was open. Carol covered her smile with her wine glass. Landon looked across the table at Madison, who was trying not to laugh and not entirely succeeding, and said, I want you to know that she does this to everyone. She's very thorough, Madison said. She's relentless, Landon said, but his voice had shifted. Something in it. The tightness that Carol had been listening to for years, that specific holding quality that had moved into his voice around the time Claire got sick and never entirely left, had loosened, just slightly, like a door that had been stuck in its frame for a long time and someone had finally pushed it at the right angle. Carol looked at Frank. Frank was looking at his menu, but the corner of his mouth moved in a way she recognized. She reached across and put her hand over his. Madison had not planned to stay more than 20 minutes. She stayed for 2.5 hours. She couldn't have explained it precisely if someone had asked. The Pierce family was not exceptional in any obvious way. Frank told a long story about a camping trip in 1987 that went wrong in stages, each stage worse than the last. And Landon kept interrupting with the specificity of someone who had heard this story many times and had developed opinions about the telling. Carol argued with both of them about key details. Sophie ate her green beans under protest while conducting what Madison slowly realized was a comprehensive interview disguised as random questions, covering topics including what Madison's favorite color was, navy blue, what she thought about thunderstorms, interesting from a distance, whether she'd ever broken a bone, her left wrist, age 11, rollerblade incident, and what she wanted to be when she was little, an architect, then a lawyer, then eventually a consultant, which was sort of both. You have a lot of jobs you almost had, Sophie observed. A lot of people do, Madison said. What do you actually want to be? Sophie asked. When you grow up all the way. There was a beat at the table. Landon started to say something, the parental intervention reflex. Say, but Madison shook her head slightly, and he stopped. I don't know, Madison said, which was true. It surprised her to say it. I think I'm still figuring that out. Sophie nodded, satisfied, as if this was the correct answer. Me too, she said. I'm between marine biologist and chef. Those are very different careers. I know I like fish and I like food, so... She shrugged. Madison laughed. It came out before she had time to curate it. A real laugh, the kind that started in the stomach. Landon was watching her when she looked up, and he had an expression she couldn't immediately name. Not the polite interest he'd been wearing most of the evening. Something more direct. More uncertain, in a way that paradoxically felt more honest. He looked away first. Are you staying in the city for the holiday? Carol asked. Yes, I have some work to catch up on, and then Priya's brunch tomorrow. On Christmas Day? Frank said. She's been doing it for years. It's become a tradition. Work on Christmas, Frank said, not unkindly, just noting it. I run a company, Madison said. There's always something. Landon does that, Carol said. He checks his phone at 11 at night. Mom. He does. I've seen him. Sophie goes to sleep and he sits at the kitchen table and answers emails until midnight, like the emails will disappear if he doesn't get to them. The emails would disappear if I didn't get to them, Landon said. That's how email works. It's how loneliness works, Carol said, pleasantly, and then turned to ask Frank something about the parking, as if she hadn't just dropped something into the middle of the table. The words sat there for a moment. Madison looked at her wine glass. Landon looked at the tablecloth. Sophie, apparently sensing an undercurrent she didn't fully understand, was quiet for the first time in the entire evening, watching her father's face with those serious eyes. Anyway, Landon said, and his voice had that careful quality again, the parking here is free after 8. Good to know, Madison said. Their eyes met across the table for just a second, just long enough. They lingered over dessert in the way that happens sometimes when no one at the table actually wants the evening to end, but no one wants to be the person to say so. Sophie had tiramisu. She ate it with great seriousness and reported after each bite on its quality, like a professional evaluator. Frank had ordered pie despite Carol's observation that he'd said he didn't want pie 20 minutes earlier. Landon had coffee and was on his second cup, which Madison noticed because she was on her second as well, and there was something companionable about it. She was telling them about the rollerblade incident. She'd left out the part about her older brother daring her to take the ramp, and how she'd spent the whole way down knowing it was a mistake, but going anyway. When Sophie put down her spoon and said, with the casual directness of someone who had been thinking about a question for a while and had decided the moment was right, "Can you be my new mom?" The table went quiet. It was not a hostile quiet. It was the quiet of 4 adults simultaneously processing something they had not expected and weren't sure how to respond to. Carol's hand went still on her wine glass. Frank looked at his pie. Landon went a color that Madison associated with contractors who just realized they'd quoted the wrong number, a specific combination of alarm and helplessness. Sophie looked at Madison with the open, patient expression of someone who believed they'd asked a reasonable question and was waiting for a reasonable answer. Sophie, Landon said, and his voice was careful, very careful. That's not... You can't ask people that. Why not? Sophie said. I'm asking. Because there are a lot of things... He stopped, restarted. It doesn't work like that. How does it work? Sophie. I'm asking a question, she said, with the gravity of a child who genuinely could not understand why the question was inappropriate. You say questions are good. You say I should ask questions about things I want to know. Landon rubbed the back of his neck. He was not looking at Madison. Madison was aware of a tight, specific pressure behind her eyes. She was not going to cry at a restaurant table in front of strangers. She was not going to do that. She looked at Sophie. What made you think of that? She asked. Her voice came out level. Sophie considered. Because you were sad when you came in, she said. And Daddy gets sad sometimes. I see him when he thinks I'm asleep. He sits in the kitchen and looks at nothing. She paused. And he looked at you different. Sophie, Landon's voice was low. He did, Sophie said, not defensively, just factually. Like how he looks at something when he doesn't know if it's okay to like it or not. The restaurant moved around them. Silverware, conversation, the low thread of a holiday song. And at their table, nobody spoke for a moment. Landon finally looked at Madison. His face had moved past the alarm into something rawer, something that people with better defenses would have hidden faster. I'm really sorry, he said quietly. Don't be, Madison said. She meant it. She looked at Sophie, this small person in a red dress with crumbs on her collar and braids coming loose and tiramisu on her lower lip, who had walked across a restaurant full of strangers because she saw someone sad and could not simply leave it alone. You're very brave, Madison said. Sophie considered this. You didn't answer, she said. Sophie, Carol said gently. It's a big question, Madison said. For a big question, I'd need some time to think about it. Sophie looked at her steadily. But you're not saying no, she said. Madison looked at her for a long moment. No, she said quietly. I'm not saying no. The valet brought Madison's car around at 9:43. Landon walked her out because it seemed like the right thing to do. And Sophie came too because Sophie went everywhere Landon went when she wanted to, and there was very little point in arguing about it. It was cold. The sky was cloudless and very dark, and the Christmas lights along the street turned everything slightly gold. Sophie had Landon's coat over her shoulders because she'd refused to go back inside for her own. Thank you, Madison said. She was addressing all of them, but she was looking at Landon when she said it. We should thank you, he said. This was... He stopped, started again. I'm glad you stayed. She's extraordinary, Madison said, meaning Sophie. I know. His voice had something soft in it. She's always been like this. Since before she could... She just decides things. She decided she liked you immediately. She doesn't do that with everyone. High standards, Sophie said from under the coat. The highest, Landon said. Madison crouched down to Sophie's level. Up close, the child smelled like tiramisu and someone's laundry detergent and had a small smear of mascara on her cheek from where she'd apparently leaned against Madison's shoulder during the walkout, which Madison was choosing not to address because addressing it would require acknowledging that the shoulder leaning had happened, which had affected her more than she was ready to examine. It was really nice to meet you, Sophie, Madison said. Are you going home now? Sophie asked. I am. On Christmas Eve? She said it without accusation, but with the specific sorrow of a child who believes no one should be alone on Christmas Eve, because Christmas Eve is when you're supposed to be with your people. My people are on video calls tomorrow, Madison said, and I have work. That's not the same, Sophie said. No, Madison said, it's not. Sophie studied her for a moment. Then she reached out and took Madison's hand in both of hers. Small, warm, deliberate, and held it for a moment. I hope next Christmas is better, she said. Madison pressed her lips together. Me too, sweetheart, she said. She straightened up. Her car was waiting. The engine was running and the air smelled like cold and pine, and across the street someone had hung lights that blinked in an irregular pattern, and it was Christmas Eve in a city that was not Phoenix and not Columbus, and she had spent the last 2.5 hours at a table with people she'd never met before, and she was not, for the first time in a very long time, thinking about the text message that was still sitting on her phone. Merry Christmas, Landon said. She looked at him. He was standing with his hands in his jeans pockets, Sophie next to him wearing his coat like a cape, and the Christmas lights were doing something to the air around them that was almost cinematic, and she was very consciously deciding not to think about what it looked like, the three of them standing there, because she was a practical person, and she had a company to run and a brunch tomorrow, and she was completely fine. Merry Christmas, Landon, she said. She got in her car. She didn't cry until she was 3 blocks away, and then only for about a minute, and she was 90% sure she wasn't crying about the text message. She didn't have his number. She didn't know his last name until she replayed the introduction in her head, Landon Pierce. And then she did. But having a name was not the same as having permission to use it, and Madison was not in the habit of locating people without permission. She drove home. She hung up her coat. She poured herself a glass of wine. She stood in her kitchen in the dark for a while, not turning on the lights, looking at the city through the window. She had an apartment that she'd chosen for its practicality. Good location, good light, good building security, close to the office. She'd furnished it with things she liked and things that worked, and it was comfortable and orderly and hers. She'd lived here for 6 years, and she liked living here. It was very quiet on Christmas Eve. She turned on a lamp. She sat on the couch. She looked at her phone and thought about calling Priya, but it was almost 10 and Priya had 3 kids, and 10 o'clock was not when you called people with 3 kids. She thought about Sophie's face, the absolute uncomplicated conviction of it. You're not saying no. She was not saying no. She thought about that for a long time. Outside, somewhere below, a car alarm went off and then stopped. Someone walked by on the sidewalk, talking loud into a phone. The city moved the way the city always moved, indifferent to the holidays, indifferent to the particular weight of a Christmas Eve spent alone. Madison picked up her wine glass. She was 30 years old. She had built something real. She had carved out a professional life that she was genuinely proud of, that she had built out of discipline and intelligence and a willingness to put in the hours when nobody was watching. She had a company. She had people who counted on her. She had a reputation that she'd earned, not inherited. She had learned through some years of trial and error what she was worth. She knew she was worth something. She just hadn't found anyone who knew it at the same time she did. The text message was still on her phone. She didn't look at it. She sat with her wine in the quiet apartment on Christmas Eve and thought about a little girl with tiramisu on her lip who had asked the biggest question of the evening with the same tone she'd used to ask if you wanted more bread. But you're not saying no. Madison smiled at her wine glass. No, she thought. I'm really not. To be continued, Priya Mehta had a theory about Madison Cole, which was that Madison was the most competent and least self-aware person she had ever met in her life. And she held this theory with the fond, resigned certainty of someone who had been her friend for 11 years. You stayed, Priya said. You stayed for 2.5 hours. I know. You were going to leave. I know. A 5-year-old stopped you. Priya. I'm not judging. I'm documenting. Priya refilled Madison's coffee mug without asking, which was something she did that Madison had always appreciated. The assumption of intimacy, the lack of ceremony around small kindnesses. The brunch was winding down, the last of the other guests having gone, Priya's kids audible somewhere upstairs in the specific way that meant they were doing something they'd been told not to do, but nothing was actually on fire. So what happened? You cried in the car, and then what? I went home. And? And nothing. I went home. I went to sleep. I came here. Priya looked at her with the expression she reserved for when Madison was being deliberately obtuse. Madison. What? You cried about it. I cried for like a minute. It was a weird night. You don't cry for a minute. You cry for 2 weeks about nothing on the inside and 0 seconds about anything on the outside. Priya sat back. You cried in the car about a man you met for 2 hours. I cried about the text message, Madison said. I cried about being stood up on Christmas Eve, which is, it was a perfectly reasonable... Was it about the text message? Madison looked at her coffee. Some of it, she said. Priya nodded slowly, in the way of someone who had just had a hypothesis confirmed and was being gracious about it. Tell me about him, she said. There's nothing to tell. I don't have his number. I don't know where he works. I know his last name. Pierce, you said. I'm not going to look up a stranger. Of course not, Priya said. That would require doing something about a feeling, which you've never done in your life. That's not... I do things about feelings. Name one. I started therapy in 2021. You went 4 times and then said you'd gotten enough out of it. I had gotten a useful amount out of it, Priya pointed at her. That's the most Madison sentence you have ever said. Madison drank her coffee. Outside the kitchen window, Priya's backyard was winter gray and still, a single plastic sled leaning against the fence from the last snow. It was Christmas afternoon and the neighborhood was quiet the way neighborhoods got quiet on Christmas afternoon. Everyone retreated inside their separate warmths. He was kind, Madison said finally. He was not in a performed way. It wasn't a show. He was just actually kind and a little awkward about it, and his daughter completely runs his life and he knows it and has accepted it. She paused. He lost his wife 4 years ago, maybe? I don't know exactly. He didn't say, but the way his mother... She stopped again. It was in the room. You could feel it. Priya was quiet for a moment. What did it feel like when you were there? Madison thought about it. Like I could breathe at a normal pace, she said, for the first time in a while. And she did not look him up. She went back to work on the 26th. She had a call with a manufacturer in Memphis about a delayed shipment that had been delayed for reasons that turned out to be preventable, which meant the call involved a certain amount of diplomatic patience on her end and a certain amount of embarrassed backpedaling on theirs. She had 2 hiring decisions to make before the first of the year. She had a contract renewal to finalize and a presentation to revise and a team check-in via video that ran 40 minutes over because her operations manager, Derek, had questions that could have been an email, but Derek had strong feelings about the value of verbal communication. She worked. She was good at it. The work had texture and momentum, and it was hers in a way that few other things in her life felt completely hers, built from decisions she'd made with her own judgment, failures she'd absorbed and worked through, a particular way of solving problems that she'd developed over time and that she trusted. She did not think about Landon Pierce every day. She thought about him on the 27th when she passed Hargrove's on her way to a client meeting and noticed the Christmas wreath on the door. She thought about him on the 29th when she was on a call and her mind wandered for a few seconds during the hold music and wandered specifically to the image of him at the restaurant table, rubbing the back of his neck with one hand, the particular off-balance quality of him when Sophie had said something that caught him sideways. She thought about him on New Year's Eve for about an hour, sitting on her couch with a glass of wine while the city went loud outside, and told herself it was nostalgia for the evening rather than anything more specific. She thought about the girl more. Sophie in the red dress, Sophie with the braids, Sophie who had walked across a full restaurant because she decided someone needed company, with the complete confidence of a person who had not yet learned that you were supposed to let other people's sadness be their own business. She thought about the way Sophie had held her hand, both hands, deliberate, warm, and said, I hope next Christmas is better, with the absolute sincerity of someone who meant it as a genuine wish, not a pleasantry. Madison had received a lot of pleasantries in her life. She knew the difference. She was thinking about none of this on a Tuesday in the second week of January when her assistant knocked on her office door and said a man named Landon Pierce was downstairs asking to see her. Madison looked up from her monitor. Say that again? Landon Pierce. He says he doesn't have an appointment. He says... Her assistant, a very composed young man named Oliver, who took pride in being unflappable, looked fractionally flapped. He says Sophie made him come, and he's sorry in advance. Madison was quiet for a moment. Send him up, she said. About. He was holding a drawing. That was the first thing she noticed when Oliver brought him in. He was holding a piece of paper, folded in half, and he looked like a man who had fully committed to a decision he was no longer certain was a good one. He was in a work jacket, the kind with a company logo on the chest, and he'd clearly come here from a job site. There was dried mud on his boots and something that might have been concrete dust on his sleeve, and he had the look of someone who'd had the conversation with himself about whether to go home and change first, and had decided that going home and changing first would give him time to talk himself out of it. Hi, he said. Hi, Madison said. Her office was on the 14th floor. It had good windows, which she'd prioritized when they moved here 3 years ago. Because she spent a lot of time in this room, and light mattered. She watched Landon take in the room, not the way people took in her office to assess it, to measure what it said about her company's financial health, or to calculate how to position themselves, but the way someone looked at a place when they were trying to orient themselves and buying time. He looked at the drawing in his hand. This is going to sound insane. Okay. Sophie drew you a picture on Christmas Day. She woke up and the first thing she wanted to do was draw you a picture, and then she wanted to bring it to you, and I spent about 3 days explaining why we couldn't just show up at someone's office when we didn't know if they wanted us to. And then you showed up at my office, Madison said. She made a compelling argument, Landon said. He said it with a helplessness that was entirely unperformed, the helplessness of a man who had been out-argued by a 5-year-old and had the self-awareness to admit it. The argument was essentially that you said you weren't saying no, and that meant yes, eventually. And if it meant yes eventually, then we should just move to eventually. Madison looked at the folded drawing in his hand. "Can I see it?" she asked. He crossed the office and handed it to her. She unfolded it. Sophie had drawn 3 figures. The largest one on the left had yellow scribbled hair and was labeled Daddy in careful crayon letters. The smallest one in the middle had brown crayon hair and was labeled Me. The third figure on the right was in a purple coat. Madison had worn a plum-colored coat to Hargrove's. She'd chosen it specifically for the evening, and was labeled, in Sophie's deliberate 5-year-old hand, Madsen. They were all holding hands. Above them, Sophie had drawn something that Madison spent a moment interpreting before she recognized it as snow. Small white crayon marks across the top of the page. The careful marks of a child who had thought about what snow looked like and tried to reproduce it. Below the figures, in letters that had clearly required some effort, Sophie had written, "I hope she comes back." Madison looked at the drawing for a long moment. "She spelled my name wrong," she said. Her voice was very steady. She was very proud of how steady her voice was. "She worked on it for a long time," Landon said. "She kept asking me how to spell Madison, and I kept telling her, and she kept—" He stopped. "She got close." "She got close," Madison agreed. She looked up. Landon was watching her with that expression again, the one she'd clocked at the restaurant, the one that was more honest than he probably intended, the looking at something uncertain if it's okay to like. It expression that his 5-year-old daughter had apparently read more accurately than he'd realized. "I should have called first," he said. "I don't have your number, but I could have. Oliver found your company website easily enough. I could have—" "It's okay," Madison said. "It might not be. You're at work, and I just showed up with a child's drawing like some kind of—" "Landon." He stopped. "It's okay," she said again. "I'm glad you came." He exhaled. It was the exhale of a man who had been holding something for a while. "Yeah?" "Yeah." She looked at the drawing again, at Madsen, holding hands with me and Daddy. "Do you want coffee? I was about to make another cup." They sat on the small couch in the corner of her office that she used for client meetings. She across from him, both of them with coffee, the drawing on the table between them. Oliver had closed the door without being asked, which Madison made a note to thank him for later. "How's Sophie?" she asked. "She's good. She's at my parents' today. My mom watches her on Tuesdays." A pause. "She talks about you." "She doesn't know me." "She talks about the woman from the restaurant, the lady with the purple coat who was sad but then wasn't." He said it with a small, crooked smile. "That's her description." "Accurate," Madison said. "Very." He looked at his coffee cup. "I wanted to come before because, honestly, I almost came by before New Year's. I drove past this block twice." "Twice?" "I was doing errands nearby." He said it with the tone of someone who understood exactly how convincing that was. "Allegedly." Madison felt the corner of her mouth move. "And you decided not to come in." "I decided I didn't have a good reason to. Showing up at someone's office because you were thinking about them it's a lot." And then Sophie made her argument. Sophie made her argument. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. It was something she'd noticed about him at the restaurant. He needed something to do with his hands when he was thinking. She said, "What if she's waiting for us to come back and we don't?" And I said people don't generally wait for strangers. And Sophie said, he stopped, with the expression of a man recalling a conversation that had somehow beaten him. She said, "She's not a stranger, she's Madsen." Madison looked at him. "I have a 5-year-old who is functionally a life coach," Landon said. "It's a complicated situation." "She's remarkable," Madison said, And she meant it without any of the standard softening people applied to compliments about other people's kids. I mean that. She has something, a way of seeing things. Most people learn to look away from what makes them uncomfortable. She doesn't. She never has. Something shifted in his face. Older, more careful. Claire used to say, he stopped. The office held the pause without discomfort. Her mother? Madison asked quietly. Yeah. He set the coffee cup down. She died when Sophie was 14 months old. Cancer. It was fast once we knew, about 8 months from diagnosis. I'm sorry, Madison said. Thank you. He said it simply, without the stiffness people sometimes developed around condolences, the awkward deflection or the minimizing. He just received it. Sophie doesn't remember her. I have pictures everywhere so she knows her face, knows her name, knows some things about her, but memory, it's not there. A beat. Which is its own kind of thing to navigate. What do you tell her? Whatever feels true. That her mom loved her. That she was brave and funny and terrible at parallel parking. A faint smile. Sophie likes the parallel parking detail. She finds it reassuring that even moms can be bad at something. Madison thought about that. About the specific parental wisdom of choosing the right true thing. That's really good, actually, that you thought to tell her that. He shrugged. Trial and error. Mostly error. He looked at her. You were stood up on Christmas Eve. Yes. That was what they said to you? The text was pretty clear. What did it say? She considered. That I seemed like a lot. That he was looking for something simple. Landon was quiet for a moment. That's a profoundly stupid thing to say to someone, he said. He said it honestly, at least. It's still profoundly stupid. No heat in it, just a flat assessment. You're clearly not too much. You stayed at a table with strangers for 2.5 hours and kept up with my mother, which is not, my mother is a lot. She asked you about your childhood within 20 minutes. She asked about Columbus. She asked everyone about their origins. She believes you can understand a person's whole character from where they grew up. He paused. She told me after that she liked you. Madison looked at him. She did? She said, and I'm quoting, that woman has real bones. What does that mean? It means she thought you were solid, that there was something actual to you. He picked up his coffee again. It's the highest compliment she has. She said it about Frank on their 3rd date, and she married him 9 months later. Madison felt something move in her chest. She made herself not analyze it directly, the way you didn't look directly at something faint in your peripheral vision. Your mom is a force of nature wearing a cardigan, Landon said. Yes. He stayed for an hour and 20 minutes. Not all of it was serious. He told her about the job site he'd come from. A renovation in Riverside Heights that had uncovered a serious mold problem behind the master bath, the particular specific nightmare of mold in old construction, the conversation with the homeowner that had required significant diplomatic effort. She told him about the Memphis call. He knew enough about supply chain logistics to ask the right questions, which surprised her. And she told him it surprised her, and he said he'd spent 6 months in his mid-20s working logistics for a regional grocery distributor before he moved into construction, which was not a career path she would have predicted. What made you switch? She asked. I kept ending up on job sites, he said. Every time I had a day off, I'd drive past a construction project and want to go in and look at what they were doing. My college roommate's dad ran a residential company. He offered me a job. It paid less. I took it. He shrugged. You know how it is. You don't always choose the thing that makes the most sense. Sometimes you just choose the thing that's yours. She thought about that. The thing that's yours. I chose consulting because I liked the problem solving, she said. I'd done 2 years in operations at a manufacturing firm, and I kept thinking their consultants were approaching things wrong. I kept writing notes about what I would do differently. She paused. My manager at the time asked if I was planning to start my own firm. I said no. He said, you should probably reconsider. And then I did. You reconsider things often? Not often enough, probably. She looked at the drawing on the table. I'm good at deciding something and staying decided, even when the decision has stopped being right. Like what? She thought about it. I decided a while back that family, the kind you choose, wasn't going to happen for me. That the work was enough. That I'd made my peace with it. She said it plainly, without self-pity, just as information. I stopped waiting for it and got good at not missing it. Landon was watching her. Did it work? He asked. Getting good at not missing it. She held his gaze. Most of the time, she said. He nodded slowly. I did something similar, he said. After Claire, I decided, not consciously, more like I noticed it had happened, that I'd narrowed everything down to Sophie and work and my parents. That was enough. And it is enough, mostly. It's a good life. A pause. But I notice things sometimes. What things? The quiet, mostly, when Sophie's asleep, the way the house sounds. He said it simply, without performing the loneliness, just describing it. You get used to a sound, and then the sound is gone, and you get used to the absence. But it's a different kind of used to. Madison looked at him. This man in a work jacket with construction dust on his sleeve, holding a coffee cup that had gone cold, telling her something true in the plainest possible language. Sophie notices, she said. You said she sees you in the kitchen. She sees everything. He said it with a mix of pride and something more complicated. I've spent 4 years trying to make sure she doesn't feel the weight of it, that she gets to just be 5, just be a kid. He looked at his hands. I don't know how well I'm managing that. You're managing it, Madison said. She's Landon. She walked across a restaurant full of strangers to make sure someone sad didn't have to leave alone. That's not a kid carrying weight. That's a kid who was given enough to be able to give some away. He looked at her for a moment. His expression did something complicated. I've never heard it put that way, he said quietly. I've had a couple weeks to think about it. Have you? I thought about her a lot, Madison said. Both of you. It was honest. It was the most direct she'd been. She watched him absorb it. The slight shift in how he was sitting, the way he looked at her and didn't look away this time. I thought about you, he said. In case that wasn't... I'm not sure what the protocol is here. I haven't done this in a long time, whatever this is. I don't think there's a protocol, Madison said. No? I think we just say the true thing and see what happens. He considered that. Okay, he said. The true thing is, I've thought about you since Christmas Eve. The true thing is, I haven't thought about someone like that in a long time. And I don't know what to do with that because I'm out of practice and my daughter has already made architectural plans for the future, so there's some pressure. He said the last part with a wry turn of voice that softened the vulnerability without eliminating it. What kind of plans? Madison asked. She wants to teach you to make her grandmother's dumplings. He said it like it was something he'd resigned himself to. She thinks cooking together is what you do with people you like. That's her metric for relationship depth. That's a reasonable metric. She also wants to take you to the park to look at the ducks, which she does with everyone she likes, and she has opinions about which ducks are worth visiting and which ones have bad attitudes. He paused. She's developed a duck taxonomy. I can't explain it. Madison laughed. The same real laugh from the restaurant, stomach first, no filter. Landon watched her laugh with a look she was starting to understand. The look of a man who had not expected to feel exactly this and was still working out what to do about it. Can I take you and Sophie to lunch? He asked. Saturday. Somewhere low stakes. No expectations. Low stakes how? She'll probably ask you 17 questions. I'll apologize 7 times. You'll tell me I don't have to keep apologizing and I'll do it anyway. He said it with self-aware honesty. It'll be imperfect and probably a little chaotic. Madison thought about her Saturday. She thought about Priya's voice. You've never done a thing about a feeling in your life. She thought about a drawing on the table between them with a purple-coated figure labeled Madsen, holding hands with a small child labeled Me. She thought about what it had felt like, sitting at that table on Christmas Eve, breathing at a normal pace for the first time in a while. Okay, she said. Yeah? Saturday, lunch. She picked up the drawing from the table and looked at it. And I want Sophie to know I love this, that she spelled my name exactly right as far as I'm concerned. Landon stood. He was smiling now. Not the careful, managed smile from the restaurant, not the rueful one. Just a real one, a little uncertain around the edges the way real things often were. She'll want to hear that directly, he said. She has a quality where she prefers primary sources. I'll tell her myself, Madison said. She walked him to the door of her office. Oliver glanced up from his desk, processed the exchange with professional neutrality, and looked back down at his screen. In the hallway, Landon stopped and turned. Madison, he said. She looked at him. I'm glad Sophie walked across the restaurant, he said. So am I, she said. She watched him go. She stood in the doorway of her office for a moment after he disappeared into the elevator lobby, holding the drawing in both hands. From somewhere outside, 14 floors down, the city was doing what it always did, moving, pressing forward, making noise. And it felt entirely separate from this particular hallway, this particular moment, the specific quiet of something beginning. She went back to her desk. She propped the drawing against her monitor. Madsen in her purple coat with her crayon yellow companions, the little white snow marks falling above them all. She had a call in 20 minutes. She had 3 emails that needed answers before end of day. She had a contract to finalize and a quarter to plan, and a company that needed her to be the person who kept all the moving pieces moving. She looked at the drawing for one more moment, then she opened her email and got back to work. The restaurant Sophie chose for Saturday lunch was not low stakes. It was a diner called Patchy's on the corner of Weller and Fifth, which had been there since approximately the Eisenhower administration based on the condition of the vinyl booths, and which Sophie had apparently decided was her personal territory based on the way she walked in. Straight to a specific booth by the window, no hesitation, sliding in with the confidence of a regular. She comes here every other Saturday, Landon said, sliding in across from her. My mom brings her. She's worked her way through most of the menu and has opinions about all of it. The grilled cheese is the best, Sophie said, without looking up from her menu, which she was examining with unnecessary thoroughness given that she'd clearly already decided. But only if you ask for it on sourdough instead of white. The white bread gets soggy. Good to know, Madison said. The milkshakes are also good, but the strawberry one is too sweet. I had it once and my teeth felt weird after. She considered. I'd get the chocolate. She'll have the chocolate, Landon told Madison. I might have the chocolate, Sophie said, with the tone of someone who wanted credit for deliberating. Madison sat across from Landon with Sophie between them on her side of the booth, which had not been the original seating arrangement but had become the seating arrangement through a series of small, unhurried movements on Sophie's part that resulted in her sitting pressed against Madison's arm, studying the menu, apparently satisfied with the reconfiguration. Landon watched this happen with the expression of a man who had learned to document rather than intervene. The waitress came. Sophie ordered the grilled cheese on sourdough and the chocolate milkshake. Landon got the club sandwich. Madison, on Sophie's recommendation, ordered the grilled cheese as well, which produced a reaction of visible, unperformed delight from Sophie. The specific pleasure of having your judgment trusted. She'll warm up to you now, Landon said. She seems already warm, Madison said. This is her at 50%, he said. There are questions incoming. There were questions incoming. Sophie conducted the interview with a conversational fluidity that would have been impressive in a journalist, moving from topic to topic without obvious transitions, circling back to things she wanted more information on, filing away answers with small nods that indicated processing. She learned that Madison had grown up with a brother named Kevin, who was 3 years older and had been, by Madison's assessment, genuinely terrible until he was about 22 and then became one of my favorite people. She learned that Madison's apartment was on the 14th floor, and you could see part of the river from the kitchen window if you stood at the right angle. She learned that Madison did not know how to swim well. I can stay alive, but I'm not elegant about it, and had been meaning to take lessons for years. She learned that Madison's favorite meal was her mother's braised short ribs, and that her mother only made it at Thanksgiving, and that missing it was one of the 3 things Madison actually didn't like about living far from Phoenix. What are the other 2? Sophie asked. Not being there when something small goes wrong, Madison said. Like when my mom had a bad cold in October. She was fine, but I wasn't there. I hate that. She paused. And the heat in the summer. I actually miss the heat sometimes. Sophie thought about this. I've never been to Phoenix, she said. It's very flat and very hot, and the sunsets are something else, Madison said. What's something else? Better than you expect. Sophie seemed to file this under acceptable description and moved on. Do you want kids? She asked. The booth was quiet for a beat. Landon made a sound that was not quite a word. Sophie, he said. I'm asking, Sophie said patiently. You don't just ask people that. Why not? Because it's private. Sophie looked at him with the measured calm of someone who found this reasoning insufficient. She told us about her mom's short ribs, she said. That's private too. That's different. How? Landon looked at Madison with the expression of a man who was out of arguments and knew it. I have no idea how, he said honestly. I was hoping to think of something while talking. Madison looked at Sophie. The girl was watching her without pressure, without guile, just that same clean, unguarded attention she'd had in the restaurant on Christmas Eve. The attention of someone who asked because she genuinely wanted to know, not because she was trying to make a point. I used to think no, Madison said. For a long time I thought that was just not my path, that I'd made my peace with it. She paused. But I think I was just protecting myself from wanting something I didn't think I could have, which is different from actually not wanting it. Sophie absorbed this. So you do want kids, she said. I think I want a family, Madison said carefully. Whatever that looks like. Sophie nodded, satisfied, and picked up half of her grilled cheese. Okay, she said, and bit into it, and the conversation moved on as though the topic had been resolved to everyone's satisfaction. Landon looked across the table at Madison. Madison looked back at him. Neither of them said anything, but something had shifted in the air between them. The particular shift of two people who have both said something true at the same time without quite saying it directly. The ducks were Sophie's idea, obviously. Patchy's was 4 blocks from Kellerman Park, which had a pond, which had ducks, which Sophie had strong feelings about visiting. It was a cold afternoon, but not miserable. The kind of winter day where the sky was high and pale blue, and the cold had a clean quality to it, the air still. Sophie walked between them on the path toward the pond with her hands in her coat pockets, narrating. The big brown one with the spot on his head is Gerald, she told Madison. He's mean. He chased a kid last April. I saw it happen. Geese do that, Landon said. Gerald might be a goose. Gerald is a duck, Sophie said with finality. He just has goose energy. Goose energy, Madison repeated. Some ducks are like that, Sophie said without irony. They act bigger than they are. Landon met Madison's eyes over Sophie's head. She pressed her lips together to keep from laughing. The pond was mostly still, the surface catching the pale afternoon light. There were 6 ducks visible, clustered near the far bank. Sophie navigated to a specific bench, her bench, apparently, and sat, pulling a small bag of torn bread from her coat pocket with the preparedness of someone who never forgot the important supplies. Come sit, she told Madison. Madison sat. Sophie tore a piece of bread and threw it toward the ducks with practiced accuracy. 2 of them turned and began moving toward the bank. The small gray one is Dot, she said. She's nice. The white one I call him Larry, but Grandma says that's not a good duck name. What does your grandma think is a good duck name? Madison asked. She suggested Pierre. Sophie threw another piece of bread. I said Pierre is too fancy for that duck. He does look like a Larry, Madison said, studying the duck in question. Exactly, Sophie said, satisfied. Landon sat on the other side of Sophie. He was watching Madison and Sophie with the particular quality of stillness that wasn't disengagement, more like he was deciding not to interrupt something that was working fine without him. Madison noticed him noticing and felt the specific self-consciousness of being watched by someone whose watching meant something. You and your grandma come here a lot? Madison asked Sophie. Every other Saturday. It's our thing. Sophie threw a piece of bread directly to Dot, who moved toward it efficiently. Grandma says things are important, like regular things. That's how you know you belong somewhere. That's a good thing to know, Madison said. Do you have things? Sophie asked. Like traditions? Like regular things that you do, so you know where you belong. Madison thought about it honestly. I have a Saturday morning coffee place, she said. I've been going for 3 years. They know my order. She paused. Priya's brunch on Christmas. That's newer, but it's becoming one. She paused again. That's probably it. Sophie considered this. That's not very many, she said. Not unkindly, just accurate. No, Madison agreed. It's not. You can have some of ours, Sophie said. It was so simple and so direct that Madison didn't have time to brace for it. The park and the ducks. If you wanted to. Landon looked at his daughter. Sophie, he said quietly. I'm sharing, Sophie said. Sharing is good. It is good, Landon said. But Madison gets to decide. I know she gets to decide, Sophie said, patient as always. I'm offering. She can decide. She looked at Madison. You can decide. Madison looked at the pond, at Larry the duck, who had finally made it to the bank and was eating bread with total concentration, at the pale winter sky above the tree line, at this small person beside her who had decided, somewhere between the restaurant and the diner and this bench, that Madison was someone worth including. I'd like that, Madison said. Sophie nodded and went back to the ducks. They walked back toward the parking lot with Sophie between them, and somewhere along the path she had taken both of their hands, not announced, just done it, slipping her small hands into theirs simultaneously with the efficiency of someone executing a plan. Landon caught Madison's eye above Sophie's head and made a face that said, I promise I didn't put her up to this, and Madison made a face back that said, I know. At the cars, Sophie hugged Madison with the whole-body commitment that children brought to hugging, arms around the middle, head tucked in, the full weight of intention behind it. Madison hugged her back. She didn't make it brief. She held on for the right amount of time, which she knew because Sophie told her when it was the right amount of time, by slowly relaxing and then pulling back. Same time in 2 weeks? Sophie asked Landon. So Madison can come to the ducks again. We can ask Madison what works for her schedule, Landon said. 2 weeks works, Madison said. Sophie looked satisfied. She climbed into the back seat of Landon's truck with the brisk efficiency of a person whose business here was concluded. Landon closed the door and turned to Madison. They were standing in a parking lot on a cold January afternoon with very little excuse to keep standing there, and neither of them moved. She's not subtle, Landon said. No. She gets it from my mother. Carol was also never subtle. Is that a warning? It's context. He looked at her. For the record, the 2 weeks, that wasn't her asking for me. I know, Madison said, but I'm also not. I don't want to push anything. You get to set the pace, whatever this is. What do you think it is? Madison asked. He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, not deflecting. I think it's something that could matter, he said. If we let it. Madison looked at him, the pale winter light, the parking lot. The sound of Sophie, faintly audible, asking the truck's radio something it could not answer. The particular specific reality of this man standing in front of her, saying the true thing. 2 weeks, she said. 2 weeks, he said. She drove home with the heat on and the radio off, thinking about belonging somewhere, and regular things, and a small girl who had decided to share her ducks. The 2 weeks became 4. The 4 became 2 months. It didn't happen in a straight line. Nothing that mattered ever did. There were weeks when Madison had travel, a client in Detroit, a conference in Atlanta, and weeks when Landon had job site crises that ate his evenings. There was a Saturday in February when Sophie had a fever and the park visit didn't happen, and Landon texted to reschedule, and Madison, without entirely thinking about it, texted back asking if there was anything she could bring, and Landon said, you don't have to do that. And Madison said, I know, and showed up 40 minutes later with soup from the good place on Mercer and a book Sophie had mentioned wanting. She hadn't stayed long. Sophie was asleep. She'd left the soup and the book with Landon at the door, and he'd looked at her with an expression she didn't let herself examine too carefully on the drive home. By March, the lunches at Patchy's had become a reliable rhythm. By March, Sophie had taught her the duck taxonomy in full. Gerald and his goose energy, Dot and her excellent manners, Larry and his consistent mediocrity, a newer duck. Sophie had named Vivian after a girl in her class she found interesting. By March, Landon had started texting her about things unrelated to scheduling. A photo of a particularly bad electrical panel he'd uncovered in a renovation, a funny thing Sophie had said at breakfast, a question about supply chain software that was genuinely a real question, but also, they both understood, not entirely only a question about software. She started texting him back with real answers and things that weren't only the answers. In April, Carol Pierce called her. Madison stared at her phone for a full 4 seconds before answering, running the calculation of how Carol had gotten her number. Landon, obviously, but also what it meant that he'd given it, and then answered. "I hope this isn't strange," Carol said, not sounding remotely concerned that it might be. "Landon gave me your number in February. I've been meaning to call." "It's not strange," Madison said, which was mostly true. "I wanted to have you for dinner," Carol said. "Not a production. Frank makes a pot roast on Sundays sometimes. Sophie's here, obviously. I thought if you didn't have plans—" "I don't have plans," Madison said. "Sunday then," Carol said. 6 o'clock. "Do you like pot roast?" "I do." "Good. Landon doesn't know I'm calling you, by the way. I want to be transparent about that." Madison smiled at her wall. "He doesn't?" "He would have done it eventually, but he overthinks things. He's been that way since he was 8. A brief pause. "He's a good man. He's just careful. He got more careful after Claire." Another pause. "I'm not trying to interfere. I just thought some things shouldn't wait for careful." Madison was quiet for a moment. "I'll be there Sunday," she said. 6 o'clock. "Bring nothing," Carol said. "Or bring wine if you need something to do with your hands when you're nervous. That's what I do." She brought wine. The pot roast was excellent. Frank had a specific method involving rosemary and something he refused to fully disclose, which he mentioned 2 or 3 times with a level of satisfaction that Carol ignored with practiced ease. Sophie sat beside Madison at the Pierce family table and provided a running commentary on the meal that nobody had asked for and everyone found entertaining. Landon sat across from Madison and passed the bread and refilled her water without making it a moment, just did it. The easy attentiveness of someone who was paying attention without performing it. After dinner, Frank and Carol took Sophie to do the dishes. A ritual they had, apparently, Sunday dishes together. Frank washing and Sophie drying with the specific intensity of someone taking her responsibilities seriously. And Madison and Landon ended up on the back porch with their wine. The April evening still cool, but carrying the first real suggestion of warmth underneath it, the smell of the neighbor's early flowers coming over the fence. "My mother called you," Landon said. It wasn't a question. "She did. I found out Thursday. She mentioned it casually, as if she'd told me already." He sounded more resigned than anything else. "She operates on her own timeline. She said you would have done it eventually." "I would have," he said. "I was working up to it." "You were working up to inviting me to dinner?" "I was working up to—" He stopped, looked at his wine glass. "I was working up to the conversation that inviting you to dinner would represent, what it would mean." Madison looked at the darkening yard. A bird was doing something in the oak tree at the back fence, a brief insistent sound, then silence. "What would it mean?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, it came out carefully, not hedged but precise. The voice of someone who had thought about what he wanted to say. "It would mean I'm serious," he said. "Which I am. It would mean I want this to be a real thing, not just Saturday lunches and texts." He paused, and that felt like something I should say directly instead of implying it through a dinner invitation. "So say it directly," Madison said. He looked at her. "I'm serious about this," he said. "About you. Whatever that means for where it goes. I'm not talking about fast, I'm talking about real. About actually trying." He turned the wine glass in his hands. "I haven't said that to anyone since Claire, and I'm aware that's information." Madison held the weight of what he'd said. She didn't rush past it. "I'm serious too," she said. "I want you to know that I'm not doing this casually. I don't know how to do things casually. I never learned." She looked at him. I'm in this. Whatever pace makes sense. He let out a breath. Something released in his shoulders. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. From inside the house came Sophie's voice, raised in protest about something related to the drying of a pot, and Frank's patient response, and Carol's laughter underneath it all. The oak tree bird had gone quiet. The April air was soft, and the porch light had come on without either of them noticing, casting a warm circle around them. And Madison sat with her wine and the specific feeling of something settling into place. Not dramatically, not with ceremony, just the quiet, solid click of a thing becoming true. She's going to know immediately, Landon said, meaning Sophie. She probably already knows, Madison said. She's been asking me since February if you were going to be around for spring, he said. She wants to show you what the park looks like with the cherry blossoms. I want to see it, Madison said. He smiled. The real one, a little uneven at the edges. Yeah? Yeah. Inside, the sound of Sophie negotiating with the dish situation continued, and the porch light held its warm circle, and neither of them moved to go back in. There was no hurry. There was, for the first time in a long time for both of them, a sense of something opening rather than closing. The kind of slow, real opening that happened when two people who had learned to make do without something finally allowed themselves to stop making do. It wasn't smooth. It wasn't simple. Between them were two different lives. A 5-year-old with a duck taxonomy and very clear ideas about the future. 4 years of grief in a house that still held it. 3 years of loneliness in a quiet apartment 14 floors up. And all the ordinary complicated material of two people who had gotten used to being alone, figuring out how to be something else. None of that had resolved. It was just sitting there alongside the wine and the April evening and the sound of laughter from inside the house, and somehow that was all right. Somehow the unresolved parts felt like the real parts, the parts that made it matter, that made it theirs. Cherry blossoms, Madison said. 3rd week of April usually, if it doesn't rain too much. Put it on my calendar, she said. He looked at her. Yeah? Put it on my calendar, she said again, and she smiled at him, and he smiled back, and that was that. The cherry blossoms were late that year. 3rd week of April came and went with rain, 4 days of it, the gray persistent kind that turned the park paths to mud and kept the trees stubbornly closed. Sophie monitored the situation with the focused concern of a small meteorologist, checking the window each morning and reporting to Landon on conditions. Madison got daily updates via text, which Landon sent with the dutiful tone of someone filing official dispatches. Still no blossoms. Sophie has opinions about this. She's negotiating with the weather now. I don't know who she thinks she's talking to, but she seems confident. Update, overcast but dry. Sophie says tomorrow. I told her we'd see. She said, we'll see means yes. Madison texted back from her office, from airports, from a hotel room in Detroit where she'd gone for 2 days to manage a client situation that couldn't wait. She texted back more than she'd texted anyone in years, and she noticed that, and she didn't do anything about the noticing except keep texting. The blossoms opened on a Thursday. Sophie called Madison directly. She'd had Madison's number since February, saved in Landon's phone as a contact Sophie could access, a decision that had not been announced but had simply been the case, and reported the development with the tone of someone delivering news of significant consequence. They're open, Sophie said. All of them, the whole tree. Which tree? Madison asked. She was in a meeting. She'd stepped into the hallway to take the call without thinking about it. The big one by the second bench, the one Larry always sits under. A pause. He doesn't know it's special, he's just a duck, but it's still special. Saturday? Madison said. Daddy said you might be busy. Tell Daddy Saturday works. She heard Sophie relay this information at full volume, apparently while still holding the phone to her ear. She heard Landon's response, something muffled. Then Sophie came back on. He says great, Sophie said. He says to tell you he didn't put me up to calling. I know, Madison said. He's standing right here making a face. Tell him I believe him. She says she believes you, Sophie told Landon, still at full volume. Then back to Madison. He doesn't look like he believes that you believe him. That's fine, Madison said. Saturday, 10 o'clock. She went back into her meeting. The cherry blossoms were, in fact, something else. The tree Sophie had been monitoring was enormous, old enough that its branches stretched wide over the path and the bench beneath it, and when you sat underneath it, the light came through the pink in a way that was almost embarrassing, too pretty to look at directly for too long. Sophie sat on the bench and tipped her head back and looked up through the branches with an expression of pure satisfaction, the satisfaction of someone whose confidence in a thing had been justified. "Told you," she said. "You told us," Landon confirmed. "I told Madison specifically," Sophie said, "because she hadn't seen it yet." Madison sat on the bench beside Sophie and looked up through the blossoms. She understood what the fuss was about. Above them, the branches moved slightly in the April air, and the petals shifted, a few drifting down to the path, and the light was doing something that wasn't quite real, and she sat with a 5-year-old pressed warm against her left side, and understood completely why Sophie had made her wait for this specifically. "What do you think?" Sophie asked. "I think you were right to make it a thing," Madison said. Sophie nodded. "Some things should be a thing," she said. Landon sat on Sophie's other side. He'd brought coffee in a thermos. 2 cups, because he'd started doing that, noting that Madison took hers with a little milk and no sugar, which was information he'd absorbed somewhere along the way without comment. He passed her a cup. She took it. Their fingers didn't quite touch. She was aware of the not quite anyway. "Claire used to say the blossoms lasted exactly long enough," Landon said. He said it the way he said Claire's name now, steadily, without bracing, the way you learned to carry a weight once you'd carried it long enough. That they were short enough to pay attention to. "She was right," Madison said. "She was usually right about things like that." He looked up at the tree. "She was bad at parallel parking, and she was right about most other things." Sophie was listening. She always was, even when she appeared focused on something else entirely. "Do you think she can see the tree?" she asked Landon. Not with anxiety, just with the straightforward curiosity of a child asking a real question. Landon considered it honestly, the way he always did with Sophie's questions, not deflecting into comfortable non-answers. "I don't know," he said, "but if she could, I think she'd like that we're here." Sophie nodded, satisfied, and went back to looking up through the branches. Madison looked at her coffee cup. She felt the particular quality of that moment, the way you felt something that was going to matter later. Not dramatically, just solidly, in the chest. The 3 of them on the bench under the cherry tree, the petals drifting. Sophie asking her real questions, and Landon answering them honestly, and none of it requiring anything from Madison except to be present for it, which she was, entirely, for the first time in longer than she could accurately measure. She met his college roommate Marcus in May. Marcus Webb was tall, worked in finance, and had known Landon since they were 18, sharing a dorm room and splitting the cost of a second-hand futon. He arrived for a Sunday dinner at Landon's house with a bottle of wine and the energy of someone who had been thoroughly briefed by Carol Pierce and was trying to appear as though he hadn't. He lasted about 20 minutes before he said, directly to Madison, "I want you to know she's the first person he's introduced to us since Claire, in 4 years. So whatever you did, keep doing it." "Marcus," Landon said. "I'm being welcoming," Marcus said. But she should know," Marcus said. "It's information that's useful to have." Madison looked at Marcus with the calm assessment of a woman who had spent a decade managing rooms full of people who said difficult things at inconvenient times. "I appreciate you telling me," she said. Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Landon. "Okay," he said. "I like her." "You've known her for 11 minutes, Landon said. "I know, I'm decisive." He picked up his wine glass. "Sophie approves, your mother approves, I approve. You can relax." "I'm relaxed." "You're the least relaxed person in this room," Marcus said. "You've refilled Madison's water glass 3 times. She was thirsty." "Landon?" "I'm relaxed," Landon said, and Madison looked at her water glass and said nothing and pressed her lips together against a smile. Kimet. June brought the first real test. It came in the form of a fundraising gala, the annual coal logistics client appreciation event, which Madison organized every year and which had grown, over 6 years, from a modest dinner for 30 into a proper event for 200, black tie. The kind of thing that generated photographs and required Madison to exist at a level of performance she found sustainable for approximately 4 hours before she needed to be alone in a quiet room. She asked Landon if he wanted to come. She asked him on a Tuesday, in the kitchen of his house, where she'd been spending more Saturday evenings lately, cooking dinner with Sophie, which had become a thing they did, Sophie directing from the counter with a wooden spoon and opinions about seasoning. And she asked it without preamble, the way she'd learned was the only method that worked for her, the direct approach. "There's a gala in 3 weeks," she said, "for my company. It's black tie, and there are speeches, and it's 4 hours of me being the person I am at work. It's a lot." She paused. "I'd like you to come, but I want you to know what you're walking into." Landon looked up from the vegetables he'd been chopping. "What am I walking into?" 200 people, open bar, a version of me that's, she searched for the right word, formal. "I'm good at it, but it's a professional face." "I know you have a professional face," he said. "I showed up at your office in construction boots. You'll need a tuxedo." "I own a tuxedo." "You do?" "My cousin's wedding 3 years ago. I'm choosing to believe it still fits." He went back to the vegetables. "I'll come." "You don't have to." "I know." He looked at her. "I want to see your professional face." "Why?" "Because you've seen my job site face, and my exhausted dad face, and my Sophie just said something I have no response to face." He said it evenly, without drama. "I want to see all your faces." Madison looked at him for a moment. "It still fits," she said. "The tuxedo?" "If it doesn't, there's a tailor on Mercer who can turn it around in a week." He laughed, actual, unguarded. It still surprised her sometimes how much she liked making him do that, how specific the satisfaction of it was. The tuxedo fit, barely, through the shoulders, but it fit. She didn't tell him he looked good when she opened her apartment door and found him in the hallway because she was running 4 minutes behind, and her earring had been giving her trouble, and she was in the tight, efficient mode she entered before events. She said, "Come in, I need 2 more minutes," and went back to her mirror. He came in and stood in her kitchen and looked at her apartment for the first time. She'd been aware of this being a threshold they hadn't crossed yet, him in her space, and was quiet while she finished. "What do you think?" she asked when she came out. She was in dark navy, a dress she'd had for 2 years that worked well in formal light. Landon looked at her. The look lasted a second or two longer than a simple assessment required. "You look, He stopped. "The dress is really something." "The dress," she said. "You're also really something," he said. "The dress is just supporting." She picked up her evening bag and did not allow herself to make a large deal of this. "Let's go," she said. "Yeah," he said, and followed her out. He navigated the gala with the calibrated ease of a man who had attended enough work events in his life to understand their grammar. When to be present, when to give space, when the person he was with needed to be working the room and he should be comfortable making conversation with strangers. He was good at the strangers. He talked to a manufacturer from Cincinnati about concrete subfloors for 20 minutes, and based on the manufacturer's body language, held his own entirely. He stood with Madison during the speeches and didn't fidget. He laughed in the right places and was quiet in the right places, and when she finally found 30 seconds between conversations to check in with him, he said, "I'm good, keep going," with the specific simplicity of a man who meant it. She kept going. At the end of the evening, in the car, she took off her heels and let the silence run for a mile before she said, "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for asking," he said. "Was it terrible?" "Parts were slow," he said. "The Cincinnati guy was interesting. The speech about Q3 projections went on. It always does." "You were—" He thought about it. "I get it now. Why you're good at it." "Good at what?" "The room, the way you move through it." He glanced at her. "You were working the whole time, but you never made anyone feel worked. That's hard to do." Madison looked out the window. 4 hours of practice every year, she said, and 11 years of regular practice before that. "It's more than practice," he said. "You actually care about the people." She was quiet for a moment. "I do," she said. "That's probably my problem." It's not a problem, he said. She looked at him. He was watching the road, both hands on the wheel, in the jacket that pulled slightly across the shoulders. She had a thought she did not say, which was that she had spent years in the company of people who either didn't notice what she cared about or noticed it and found it excessive. That being in the company of someone who noticed it and called it a feature rather than a flaw was something she was still learning how to receive. She reached across and put her hand over his where it rested on the center console. He turned his hand over and held hers without comment, without ceremony, just held on. They drove the rest of the way like that. The harder conversation happened in July. It happened on a Sunday evening at Landon's house after Sophie had gone to bed, which was when the harder conversations happened, Sophie's bedtime functioning as a kind of natural partition between the parented hours and the hours when two adults could be honest about things they'd been carrying. It started because Landon had been quiet all evening, not cold, just interior, somewhere behind his eyes. And Madison had learned by now to recognize that quality and not push it, and had let it run through dinner and bath time and Sophie's 3-book negotiation, which tonight had concluded with 2 books and a compromise. And by 9 o'clock they were in the kitchen with the remains of dinner, and Landon was washing a pan with more thoroughness than the pan required. "Hey," she said. "Hey, where are you?" He set the pan down, turned around, leaned against the counter with his arms crossed, not defensively, but in the way of someone bracing for their own words. "Claire's birthday was Thursday," he said. Madison didn't say anything. She waited. "I'm fine. It's not—" He stopped. "I don't fall apart about it. I haven't in a long time. But every year it's a day where I'm just not all the way here. And this year Sophie asked me in the morning why I looked sad, and I told her, and she went and got Claire's picture from the mantel and put it on the kitchen table, just set it there." He paused. "And then we had breakfast, the 3 of us, me and Sophie and the picture." Madison felt the tightness behind her eyes. "She's going to be an extraordinary person," Madison said. "She already is." He looked at the floor. "The thing I've been sitting with is, I don't want you to feel like you're in competition with something. I want to be clear that you're not." "I don't feel that way," Madison said. "I worry you might." "Landon." She waited until he looked at her. "I'm not in competition with who Claire was to you. That's not how this works. She's Sophie's mother. She was your wife. She's part of this house, and part of your history, and part of who Sophie is. I'm not trying to replace any of that." "I know you're not," he said. "I know that." He pressed his lips together. I've spent 4 years being careful not to give Sophie a version of me that's only about managing the loss, not to let it be the whole story of us." He looked at her. "And then you came along, and there's this other story starting, and I don't always know how to hold both." Madison came around the counter and stood in front of him. She was aware of the rarity of this moment. Landon, without his management in place, without the capable, steady surface he mostly kept up, the version of him that was actually just standing there not knowing what to do. "You don't have to hold them separately," she said. "They're both yours. They can both be true at the same time." She paused. "You loved her, and you're here now, with me. Those aren't competing facts." He looked at her for a long moment. "When did you get this good at this?" he asked. "I have a lot of practice being practical about difficult things," she said. "I've been applying it here." "It's not practical," he said. "What you just said." "No," she admitted. "That one came from somewhere else." He reached out and pulled her in. Not dramatically, just one arm, steady, bringing her against his chest. She went. She stood there in his kitchen with her arms around his middle and his chin on the top of her head, and the house quiet around them, Sophie asleep somewhere above, Claire's birthday a week past, July sitting heavy and warm outside the window. "I'm scared sometimes," he said. It came out quiet, like something he'd been deciding whether to say. "Of what?" she asked. "That I'll be bad at this. That I'll be too careful, too stuck in my own patterns." He paused. "That you'll see all of it and decide it's too much." She pulled back enough to look at him. "You told me in January I wasn't too much," she said, "when I told you what that text said. You're not. Neither are you," she said. "Your whole life isn't too much. Sophie isn't too much. Grieving your wife isn't too much. She held his gaze. I walked into this knowing what I was walking into. I'm still here. His expression did something that she didn't look away from, something that moved through it like weather, complex, unguarded, real. He pressed his forehead to hers for a moment, just rested there. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. By September, Madison was at Landon's house most weekends. It hadn't been a decision exactly. It had been a series of decisions so small and consistent that by the time she was aware of the pattern was already real. Saturday morning, she brought her coffee from the good place on Mercer because she'd learned Landon's machine made weak coffee and he wouldn't replace it because Sophie had once called it the coffee man and now had an attachment to it that made replacement politically complex. Sunday evenings, she sometimes cooked. Not often, she was not a natural cook, but she was learning, mostly at Sophie's direction, with results that were inconsistent but improving. Sophie had given her a drawer. Not announced, not ceremonial. Madison had arrived one Saturday in August to find a bottom dresser drawer in the spare room had been cleared and lined with paper, and Sophie had written Madison's drawer on a piece of tape and stuck it on the front. She had explained that it was for when Madison left things, so the things had somewhere to go. Madison had looked at the drawer for a moment. "Thank you, sweetheart," she'd said. "I measured it," Sophie said. "It fits a sweater." Madison had brought a sweater the following weekend. Sophie had supervised the folding. In October, Priya met Landon at a dinner Madison hosted. Her apartment, the first time she'd hosted a real dinner there in longer than she could track. The table actually set, not eating on the couch. Priya arrived early and looked around the apartment and looked at Madison and said, quietly, while Landon was getting wine in the kitchen, "You clean this place differently." "I clean it the same way I always—" "You put flowers on the table," Priya said. "I always—" Madison stopped. "Okay, I don't always put flowers on the table." "You look different too," Priya said, not unkindly, just accurately. "You look like someone who has somewhere to be that they're glad about." Landon came back with the wine, and Priya turned to him with the full force of 11 years of accumulated love for Madison. Cold directed at the man who had apparently done something significant to her equilibrium, and Landon received it the way he received most things, steadily, with the slight self-conscious awareness of someone being assessed, but without deflecting. Later, helping Madison with the dishes, while Landon was on the phone with his parents about Sophie's pickup in the morning, Priya said, "He looks at you the way I hoped someone would someday." "How's that?" "Like you're the realest thing in the room," Priya said. "Like he keeps checking that you're still there." Madison washed the same dish twice without noticing. Cut. She told him about Thomas Aldrich in November. She'd been meaning to for a while, not because it was a great secret, but because it was the kind of thing that deserved saying directly. The 3-year relationship that had ended 2 years before the Christmas Eve blind date. The engagement that had almost happened and hadn't. She told him on a walk, the November air finally cold enough to mean it, their hands in their respective pockets. "He said he loved me," she said, "and I believed him. But he had a clear picture of what his life was supposed to look like, what the person in it was supposed to look like." She kept her eyes on the path, and I kept almost fitting that picture. I kept being close enough that he tried to make it work. And he never said anything direct. It was always small things. A comment about what I ate, a preference for social situations where I was in a professional context rather than just present. She paused. After 3 years, I realized I'd spent the whole time trying to be a version of myself that would finally fit, and I was never going to. Landon was quiet for half a block. "When it ended, I thought the problem was me," she said. "That I was genuinely too much, the wrong shape for anyone to want." "Madison," he said. "I know it wasn't true," she said quickly. "I know that now, but it took a while." She finally looked at him. "That's why Christmas Eve hit the way it did. It wasn't just one text. It was the text landing on top of 3 years of the same message." He stopped walking. She stopped too. "You're not the wrong shape for anyone," he said. He said it without embellishment, no performance around it, just flat and certain. "I know," she said. "I want to make sure you know." "I know," she said again, and this time it came out differently. Full, settled, Not a deflection, but a real thing. She did know. She'd been rebuilding the knowing for 2 years, and this man and his daughter and his family had done something to the reconstruction that she hadn't asked for and couldn't adequately measure. He reached out and took her hand, pulled it out of her pocket, and held it in his, which was warmer. They stood there for a moment on the November path, and then kept walking. Thomas was bad at parallel parking too, she said. Yeah? Worse than you described Claire. There's worse than Claire? Significantly, she said. He laughed, and she laughed, and the cold November air took the sound of it and did something nice with it, and they walked back toward the car with their hands still together, and the afternoon was entirely ordinary and entirely not. December came back around the way it always did. Not gradually, but all at once. The city switching over like a set change, lights appearing in windows overnight, the smell of something colder and more particular in the air, the year beginning to feel like it was gathering itself toward an ending. Madison noticed it on the morning commute, the way the light hit differently at 7 a.m. now, the angle of it lower and thinner, the street below her apartment building already wearing the particular gray gold of early winter. She stood at her kitchen window with her coffee and looked at the piece of river you could see if you stood at the right angle, and she thought about the fact that it had been a year. Not quite to the day, but close enough that she was aware of it. Aware in the way you became aware of anniversaries before you'd fully decided to call them anniversaries. A year since Hargrove's. A year since she'd put on her camel coat and made a reservation at a corner booth and gotten a text message that said she seemed like a lot. She thought about the woman who had read that text, the particular quality of stillness that had come over her when she read it, the controlled and practiced way she'd put the phone face down on the tablecloth, the face she'd assembled for the walkout. She recognized that woman. She was not entirely finished being that woman. Some things didn't resolve completely, some habits of protection took longer to unlearn than they took to build. But there was a distance between then and now that she could feel in a physical way, the way you felt the distance you'd walked when you finally stopped and turned around. She finished her coffee and texted Landon. 1 year ago this week. His response came back in 4 minutes, which meant he was already at a job site and had read it between tasks. I know. Sophie's been talking about the anniversary dinner at Hargrove's for 2 months. She has. She wants the same table. She's been monitoring the reservation system. I don't know how she found out Hargrove's has an online booking page, but she did, and she checks it. Madison looked at her phone. She's 6, she typed. She's 6 going on 37, Landon wrote back. She also wants you to wear the purple coat. Madison set her phone down and looked at the river for a moment. Then she went to her closet and checked that the coat was still in good condition, which it was, and went to work. The thing about a year was that it showed you what was real. Madison had learned this in business long before she applied it to anything personal, that the first 90 days of anything were the performance, the conscious effort, the best behavior period when everyone was showing what they wanted to show. The real picture came later. The real picture came when the effort became too expensive to sustain, when the ordinary rough edges of things showed through the surface, when two people stopped performing for each other and just existed in the same space. She and Landon had been existing in the same space for most of the past year, and what that had shown her was not a perfect picture. It had shown her a man who was still learning how to ask for help, who defaulted to managing everything alone out of a habit so deep he didn't always notice he was doing it. Who would carry a problem for 2 weeks before mentioning it, who had a stubborn streak about small things, the coffee machine, a particular route to the park, the correct way to load a dishwasher, that could be maddening in the specific way only small, stubborn things could be. She had seen him lose his patience twice, sharply, and then be too hard on himself about losing it. She had seen him disappear into the job site world for a stretch in October when a project went sideways, the texts going sparse, the calls shorter, and she'd had to say directly, I need you to tell me when things are hard, not just get quiet. And he'd had to hear it and not get defensive about hearing it, and he hadn't, which had mattered. And he had seen her. He had seen the Madison who worked until midnight on a deadline and then was short with him on the phone because she was too tired to manage herself properly. The Madison who sometimes needed to be left alone in a room for an hour after a social event, not because anything was wrong, but because people exhausted her in a way she still hadn't made complete peace with. The Madison who second-guessed herself in spirals sometimes, about the company, about decisions, about whether the choices she'd made were the right ones, and who hated being in those spirals, and hated it more when they were visible. He had seen her be wrong about something and dig in anyway, and he'd had to navigate that without capitulating and without escalating, which was a specific skill that he was, she admitted, better at than she was. They had irritated each other. They had miscommunicated and had to repair it. There had been a night in October when they'd gone to bed on unresolved ground, because the conversation was going in circles, and they both needed sleep more than resolution, and that had felt like failure in the moment, and in retrospect had simply been what two adults looked like when they were tired. They were still here. Both of them. That was the real picture. But Sophie turned 6 in November, and the party was at Carol and Frank's house, which was the only location Sophie had considered, because Carol's house had the backyard and the big table and the quality of warmth that Sophie associated with celebrations. The warmth of a place where there was always enough food and enough chairs and always one more person who could fit. Madison helped Carol make the cake the afternoon before. This had not been planned. She'd come over to drop off the decorations Sophie had selected. A specific combination of colors that Sophie described as ocean, but also kind of space, which Madison had interpreted correctly as teal and silver and a deep blue. And she'd found Carol at the kitchen counter with flour on her hands and a look on her face that said the batter wasn't cooperating. "I might need a second opinion," Carol said, not looking up. "I'm not a baker," Madison said. "You're a problem solver," Carol said. "This is a problem." She'd stayed for 3 hours. The cake eventually cooperated. They'd talked while they baked, or rather, Carol had talked and Madison had listened and responded and slowly understood that she was in the middle of something she hadn't anticipated, which was being trusted with Carol's honest thoughts, the way you trusted someone who was actually family. Carol talked about Frank's retirement, which was coming in the spring, and which Frank was less prepared for than he believed. She talked about Landon when he was small, the particular stubborn quality he'd had even at 7, the way he'd decided things, and then held them the way you held something you were afraid would be taken. She talked about Claire with the directness of a woman who had decided grief didn't improve by avoiding its subject, and what she said about Claire was not sentimental but true. That she'd been difficult sometimes, that she'd had strong opinions about the right way to do most things, that she and Landon had argued with the energy of two people who loved each other completely and were also both convinced they were right, that she had been a good mother in the 14 months she'd had. "I'm telling you this," Carol said, folding something into the batter, "because I want you to know her as a person and not a story." She paused. Stories get simplified. She deserves better than simplified. Madison looked at the woman across the counter, at the flour on her hands and the reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the birthday cake taking shape between them. "Thank you for telling me," she said. Carol looked at her steadily. "You've been good for him," she said. "And for Sophie. I want you to know that I see that, and I'm grateful." She went back to the batter. "I'm not a person who says that kind of thing twice, so—" "Understood," Madison said. "Good." Carol handed her a spatula. "Help me with this." The birthday party was chaos of the cheerful kind. 7 6-year-olds with opinions and volume levels, the backyard strung with teal and silver lights, Frank operating the grill with the focused intensity of a man who took grilling seriously, Marcus doing crowd control with the competence of someone who'd learned from experience that children's parties required exactly the same skills as difficult client meetings. Sophie moved through it all with the satisfied energy of a person whose vision had been fully realized. She found Madison near the food table midway through the afternoon and stood beside her with the quiet attentiveness that always meant she was about to say something that she'd been thinking about for a while. "Are you happy?" Sophie asked. Madison looked down at her. Sophie had teal frosting on her chin from the cake, and one of her barrettes had migrated somewhere around her ear. "Right now?" Madison said. "In general," Sophie said, with the seriousness of someone asking a real question. "Like, are you?" Madison thought about it. She didn't give Sophie the easy answer because Sophie, at 6 the same as at 5, could tell the difference between a real answer and a managed one. "Yes," she said. "I really am." Sophie nodded. "Good," she said, "because I am too." She looked around the yard, at her grandfather at the grill, at Marcus chasing a child across the grass, at her dad coming through the back door with a tray of something, and looking around for Madison and finding her and his face doing the thing it did. "I think we're all better now," she said. "Better than what?" Madison asked softly. Sophie thought about it. "Before," she said, "when we were missing some parts." She went back to her party. Madison watched her go. She did not do anything about the particular sensation in her chest except let it be there, which was something she'd been learning how to do all year. Letting things be there instead of filing them away before she'd finished feeling them. Landon appeared beside her with the tray, which turned out to be more food nobody needed. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Sophie just turned 6 going on 45, Madison said. He looked at his daughter across the yard. "Every year," he said. "Every year she gets a little more herself." "That's a good thing to be?" Madison said. He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "It really is set." They went back to Hargroves on the 23rd of December. Same table. Sophie had secured the reservation herself by telling Carol, who had called on her behalf, that it was very important and was for a special occasion. The hostess remembered them, or remembered Sophie specifically, because Sophie was the kind of person restaurants remembered, and there were small candles on the table that hadn't been there the year before. Sophie was in a different dress. Red again, because she'd decided red was her Christmas color, and she intended to be consistent about it, but this one had a sash that she was very serious about. Her braids were neater. She had grown 3 inches and lost 2 more teeth, and she still sat between them when she could arrange it, had in fact arranged it this evening by sliding into the booth first, and then indicating where each of them should sit with the quiet authority of someone who knew exactly how she wanted things. They ordered. Sophie consulted the dessert menu first, which was her method. The evening moved the way evenings moved when everyone at the table was comfortable, with room for silence and room for noise, no performance to it, just the easy back and forth of people who had eaten a lot of meals together and knew each other's rhythms. Frank and Carol were at their own table nearby, Frank's idea. He'd said Sophie's anniversary dinner ought to be for the 3 of them, and Carol had agreed, and they'd made their own reservation 2 tables over, which Sophie had approved as a compromise. Madison caught Carol's eye across the room at one point. Carol raised her wine glass slightly. Madison raised hers back. "Do you remember what you were thinking about?" Sophie asked her. "When you were leaving?" It took Madison a moment. "When?" "Last year, when I stopped you." Sophie was matter-of-fact, not dramatic, just curious. "What were you thinking?" Madison considered lying. Not seriously, but the reflex was there. The automatic protection, the managed version. She set it aside. "I was thinking I was going home to an empty apartment," she said, "and that it was going to be very quiet." Sophie nodded. "Is your apartment still quiet?" "Sometimes," Madison said, "but it doesn't feel the same way anymore." "Why not?" Madison looked at Landon across the table. He was watching her the way he watched her now, openly, without trying to seem like he wasn't. "Because quiet is different when it's something you chose instead of something that happened to you," she said. Sophie considered this. "Like the ducks," she said. "Exactly like the ducks," Madison said. Sophie appeared satisfied and went back to her bread. Landon reached across the table and put his hand over Madison's. She turned her hand over and held his, the way they'd been holding hands in cars and on walks and on park benches all year, the easy weight of it, the way it had stopped being a thing she noticed and became instead a thing she'd miss if it was gone. "Thank you for staying," he said. "Last year." "Sophie asked me to," she said. "You could have said no." "I know." She looked at him. "I didn't want to." After dinner, they walked. Sophie walked between them on the street outside Hargroves, both her hands occupied, and she demanded mittens from both of them because the city had done something with its cold, turned it up overnight, the kind of December air that got into the back of your throat and made everything sharper and more particular. The street was dressed for Christmas, the way city streets dressed for Christmas, with a particular extravagance that managed to be both too much and exactly right. The lights strung between buildings, the storefronts all competing, the air smelling like cold and something sweet from the bakery on the corner of 5th. Sophie was narrating the lights, assigning them ratings, which was a thing she'd invented in October and applied liberally. 9 out of 10, she said about the bakery's string lights. Classic, not trying too hard. She considered the department store display across the street. 7, too many colors, busy. You're grading Christmas lights, Landon said. Someone has to, Sophie said. Madison smiled. The cold air was on her face, and Hargrove's was a block behind them, and she was wearing the purple coat, the plum-colored one, the one Sophie had asked her to wear, the one that a child had drawn in crayon a year ago on a piece of paper that was currently framed in Madison's apartment between the window and the bookshelf, Madsen standing with her people in the snow. Landon slowed. Sophie, holding both their hands, slowed with them and looked up at something, a gap between buildings where the sky was visible, and it had begun to snow. Not dramatically, just quietly, the way it sometimes started, like the sky had decided to try something and was seeing how it went. Small flakes, unhurried, drifting through the Christmas lights. Snow, Sophie said, with the tone of someone whose prediction had come true. You didn't predict snow, Landon said. I thought about it, Sophie said. That counts. She let go of their hands and held hers out, palms up, watching the flakes land. She did this with the absolute unselfconscious attention of a child who had not yet learned that wonder was something you were supposed to be subtle about. She just stood there with her palms up and her face tipped toward the sky and let the snow fall on her. Landon and Madison stood behind her. The snow fell on all of them, thin and clean, and the city kept moving around them. The traffic, the other pedestrians, the lit windows of everything open and everything closed. And between two buildings, a small girl was catching snow in her mittens with total concentration. Hey, Landon said. She looked at him. He was looking at her the way Priya had described, like she was the realest thing in the room, like he was checking that she was still there. The snow was in his hair. The Christmas lights were doing something warm and gold to the air around them. I love you, he said. He said it the way he said the true things, without ceremony, without preamble, just directly, because he decided that was the only way that meant anything. He said it, and then he just looked at her and waited. Madison looked at him. At this man with snow in his hair and a tuxedo jacket under his winter coat, because he'd come from a holiday work function and hadn't had time to change, with dried mud perpetually somewhere on his boots and a coffee machine he wouldn't replace because his daughter had named it, with a grief he'd learned to carry alongside him rather than under him, with a stubborn streak about small things and a generosity about large ones, with a daughter who had walked across a full restaurant because she couldn't leave someone sad and alone. She felt the year behind her like something solid she was standing on. The lunches at Patchy's and the cherry blossoms and the gala where he'd talked to the Cincinnati man about concrete subfloors, the soup she'd left at the door, the October silence and the honest conversation that followed it. The drawer lined with paper and Madison's drawer on a piece of tape. Carol handing her a spatula and saying, I want you to know her as a person and not a story. The November walk where she'd told him about Thomas Aldrich, and he'd taken her hand out of her pocket and held it in his warmer one. All of it, the whole imperfect, unsmooth, real year of it. I love you, she said. I've been not saying it for 2 months because I didn't want to be the one who said it first, and then she stopped. I was protecting myself. Habit. You could have said it, he said. I know that now. You can always, I know, she said. I love you. I'm saying it now. He pulled her in with both arms. She went. The snow fell on both of them, and Sophie had noticed, had turned around, and was watching them with an expression that was not surprise. Sophie had not been surprised. Madison was quite certain, since approximately February, but something closer to the deep satisfaction of a person whose plan had worked out exactly as intended over the course of what she must have understood was a very patient timeline. Finally, Sophie said. Sophie, Landon said into Madison's hair. What? Sophie said. I've been waiting. 6 months. The conversation happened on a Sunday in June in the kitchen of Landon's house, which had been slowly absorbing evidence of Madison's presence over the course of a year and a half in the way that felt less like accumulation and more like settlement. Her mug on the second hook, her reading glasses on the counter by the window, a jacket on the hook by the door, a specific category of tea in the cabinet that nobody else drank, the kind of small territorial evidence that domestic life leaves without announcement. They'd been talking about it for a while. Not directly, they'd been talking around it, in the way of two careful people who had both been burned by moving too fast in past lives and had privately agreed, without saying so explicitly, to let things be what they were before demanding they be something more. The direct conversation happened because Sophie started it. "When is Madison moving in?" she asked at breakfast. She said it with the same tone she used to ask about logistics. What time was practice? When was the dentist? Which day was the field trip? Landon set down his coffee. We haven't, but you're going to," Sophie said. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" He opened his mouth, closed it. "Because it's a big thing," he said. "It involves a lot of logistics." Sophie looked at him steadily. "That's what you say when you can't think of a real reason," she said. "I have real reasons." "What are they?" He looked at Madison. Madison raised her eyebrows in a way that communicated clearly that this was his conversation, and she was going to let him have it. "I don't want to rush anything," he said. "I want to make sure that it's the right time." Sophie looked at him with patience that was running low. "Daddy," she said, "she has a drawer." The kitchen was quiet for a moment. "She has a drawer," Sophie repeated, in case this evidence had not fully landed. "Her sweater is in it. She knows where everything is. She makes the coffee on Sundays because the coffee man makes bad coffee." She paused. "She's basically already here. She just goes home after." Landon looked at his daughter, then at Madison. Madison was looking at Sophie with a complicated expression, the expression of someone who has been represented accurately and completely by a 6-year-old and isn't sure how to process the precision of it. "She's not wrong," Madison said. "I know," Landon said. "I'm never wrong about this stuff," Sophie said modestly. Landon was quiet for a moment. He was doing the thing he did when he was thinking something through in real time, turning it over, checking it from different angles. Madison knew the look now. She waited. "Do you want to?" he asked her. Not in front of Sophie as a performance, just directly. "Because I want to, if you want to. I've wanted to for a while." "I've wanted to for a while," Madison said. "Then we should probably stop waiting," he said. "Probably," she said. Sophie picked up her fork and went back to her eggs with the satisfaction of someone whose meeting had reached a resolution. "I'll help you pack," she told Madison. "I'm good at organizing." "I know you are," Madison said. "I labeled all my books by color and then by size," Sophie said. "It's a system." "It's a system," Landon confirmed. "Besides, moving took a Saturday and most of a Sunday. It was not smooth. The elevator in Madison's building had a weight limit that required 3 trips instead of 1. 2 boxes were labeled wrong. The bookshelf from her apartment did not fit where they'd planned to put it and had to be reconfigured into the spare room, which required moving the spare room furniture, which required Sophie's strong opinions about where the spare room furniture should go, and 3 rounds of negotiation. Marcus came to help and was useful for 40% of the time and philosophically adrift the other 60%, which was about what anyone would have predicted. By Sunday evening, the worst of it was done. The bookshelf was in the spare room. The boxes were mostly in the right rooms, though 3 remained unidentified as to content. Madison's mug was on the second hook in the kitchen, but now it was just permanently there, not visiting. Sophie had taken it upon herself to make dinner. Macaroni and cheese from the box, which she had been cleared to make independently with supervision and made with serious attention to the ratio of butter to milk. Madison sat at the kitchen table with her shoes off and a glass of water and watched Sophie stir the pot with the focused energy of someone whose cooking show was going well. "You're supposed to keep stirring," Sophie told her. "You're doing the stirring," Madison said. "I know. I'm telling you for when you do it by yourself." Sophie stirred conscientiously. "Because now you live here, you're going to need to know how to make it right." "I make it right," Madison said. "You use too much milk," Sophie said. "Daddy told me." "Daddy has opinions about boxed macaroni." "Daddy has opinions about everything," Sophie said, which was accurate. And Landon, coming in from the living room with an empty box, said, "I heard that." And Sophie said, "I know," without looking up from the pot. They ate at the kitchen table, the three of them, the boxes still in the hallway, and the bookshelf not quite where it should be, and the general evidence of a life in mid-transition everywhere you looked. The macaroni was good. Sophie was right about the milk ratio. Madison ate 2 bowls, and Sophie noticed and looked satisfied. After dinner, Sophie had a bath and a book and was asleep by 8:30, which was earlier than usual and probably the result of 2 days of genuine labor on her part. She had worked hard, actually hard, with the specific physical commitment of a child who had decided this mattered and was putting in accordingly. Madison stood in the doorway of Sophie's room for a moment after she was asleep. The room was Sophie's entirely. Drawings on the walls, the shelf of books organized by color and size, the particular organized chaos of a child who had strong aesthetic opinions and the energy to implement them. On the nightstand was the picture of Claire, there every night, part of the room the way everything else was part of the room. Madison looked at it, at the woman in the photograph who had loved this child for 14 months with everything she had, who had been complicated and funny and bad at parallel parking and right about most other things, who had left this house and this man and this small person a shape that had taken years to learn to live inside. "I'll take good care of them," Madison said quietly. Not to anyone specifically, just said it. She turned off the light and closed the door. Landon was in the living room. He'd been attempting to find a place for one of the boxes and appeared to have decided against it and was sitting on the couch instead, which was a decision Madison fully endorsed. She sat beside him. He put his arm around her. She leaned into his side, which still required a small conscious choice. She was better at receiving than she used to be, but it still required the choice, and she still made it, and every time she made it, she meant it. "How are you doing?" he asked. "Good," she said. And then, because she'd learned the difference between the managed answer and the real one, overwhelmed in a good way, the way things feel when they're real. He understood what she meant. He always did, which was still something she was getting used to. "Sophie's already planning the drawer system for your things," he said. "She mentioned this morning that you probably need more than one drawer." "She's not wrong. She's usually not." He was quiet for a moment. "I want you to know, this is your home now, not as a guest, not as someone passing through. I want it to feel like yours." "It already does," she said. "That's a strange thing. I expected it to feel strange, and it just doesn't." "Is that good?" "It's very good," she said. He pressed his lips to the top of her head. She felt the warmth of it. Outside the window, the June evening was long and light, the way June evenings were long and light before they finally gave in and went dark. And through the window was the oak tree in the backyard that Madison had first seen through the kitchen window in April when she'd come for Carol's Sunday dinner. Its branches were full now, summer green, moving slightly in whatever wind there was. She'd been watching that tree through the seasons. She'd watched it bare in January and beginning in April and full in June, and she would watch it turn and empty and come back again. She was going to be here for the turning. There was something about that, the ongoingness of it. Not the romantic version of a future, not the clean, imagined thing, but the actual version, which included boxes that weren't unpacked, and milk ratios and a coffee machine named by a 6-year-old, and a drawer lined with paper, which included grief and stubbornness and a spiral or two, which included all the ordinary, difficult, beautiful texture of people who had decided to build something together and were going to keep building it even when the building was inconvenient. That was the version she wanted. That had always been the version she wanted. She just hadn't known, for a long time, that she was allowed to say so. Just so. A year and a half earlier, a woman in a camel coat had read a text message that said she was too much and prepared to walk out of a restaurant alone on Christmas Eve. A year and a half earlier, a 5-year-old girl in a red dress had watched that woman from across the room and decided, with the complete moral authority of a person who had not yet learned to mind her own business, that she couldn't just let her leave. Here is what Madison understood now that she hadn't then. It wasn't the grand gesture that had changed anything. It wasn't the dramatic moment, the speech, the perfectly timed declaration. It was the small one. It was a child who walked across a room because she saw someone sad and thought, no, That's not right. It was the decision so small it barely looked like a decision. To stop, to look back, to stay. The world told people to protect themselves. Don't be too much. Don't want what you're not supposed to want. Don't let people see the real shape of you before you're sure they can handle it. And those weren't bad lessons, exactly. They came from somewhere real, from real wounds, and Madison had lived by most of them for years with legitimate reasons. But Sophie had not gotten that lesson yet, or she'd gotten it and refused it. At 5 years old, she'd looked at a stranger's sadness and hadn't calculated the risk or the cost. She'd just gone. And the thing was, she was right. That was the part Madison kept coming back to. The child was right. Not in a simple way, not in a fairy tale way, but in the specific real way of something that required 1.5 years of patience and 2 adults willing to be imperfect at each other, and a lot of lunches and a park bench under a cherry tree, and an honest conversation in July, and a drawer lined with paper. The child was right that this was worth walking across the room for. Some people came into your life and opened a door you decided was sealed. Not because they had the key, not because they broke through anything, just because they knocked. Just because they showed up and knocked and waited and refused to leave, with the quiet, inexorable certainty of someone who knew exactly what was on the other side. Sophie Pierce knocked on Madison Cole's door in a Christmas Eve restaurant with a gap-toothed smile and a question so simple it was devastating. Did somebody hurt your feelings? And everything that came after, every ordinary, beautiful, imperfect thing, came from that one small knock. On a Thursday evening in July, 2 weeks after the moving boxes had been unpacked and the bookshelf had been reconfigured twice more before Sophie was satisfied with it, Madison was working at the kitchen table when Sophie came downstairs for a glass of water. She was in her pajamas, the ones with the small stars on them, her hair loose from its braids and sleep soft around her face. She got her water from the tap and stood at the counter and drank it, and then stood there for a moment looking at Madison. "You're working late," Sophie said. "Almost done," Madison said. Sophie padded over to the table and looked at Madison's screen with the candid curiosity of a person who had never been taught that reading over someone's shoulder was rude. "Is it hard?" she asked. "A little," Madison said. "But the interesting kind of hard." Sophie considered this. Then she went around to Madison's side of the table and leaned against her, warm and sleep-heavy, the way children leaned when they were almost but not quite awake. Madison shifted to make room for her, and Sophie tucked against her side, and Madison put one arm around her and kept working with the other. After a few minutes, Sophie said quietly into the space between almost awake and just comfortable, "Mom?" She said it the way you said a word you'd been practicing in private, testing the shape of it, seeing how it landed in the air. Not dramatic, not a big moment, just said it. Madison went very still. "Yeah, sweetheart," she said. Sophie didn't say anything else. She'd gotten what she came for. The glass of water, maybe, or something more than that. She was asleep inside of 2 more minutes, warm against Madison's side. The kitchen around them quiet and lit and full of the ordinary evidence of a life being lived inside it. Madison sat for a while without working. She sat with the sleeping child leaning against her, and the summer evening going dark outside the window, and the oak tree visible against the sky, and the sound of Landon moving around upstairs, his routine footsteps, the familiar sound of him. And she thought, this is the thing, not the dream of the thing, not the imagined version, the actual thing, the one that had dishes in the sink and imperfect conversations and a coffee machine nobody would replace, the one that had been built not from anything grand, but from a series of small choices to stay, to show up, to keep going even when it was inconvenient or uncertain or scary. She thought about the woman she'd been in the parking lot of Hargrove's 11 months before that Christmas Eve, the one who'd had the efficient apartment and the carefully managed life, and who had gotten so good at not missing what she'd decided she couldn't have, that some days she almost believed it. She thought, I'm glad I didn't leave. She thought, I'm glad she stopped me. She thought, some things that look like luck are really just someone refusing to walk past. Outside, the July night was warm and full, and Madison Cole sat in her kitchen in her house with a sleeping child against her side, and she held on, and she meant it, and she was not alone, and she was not too much. And she was, finally, completely, with all her imperfect, real, specific self, exactly where she belonged.